Today, a long overdue vinyl update, plus I want to talk to you about an issue with recent vinyl reissues that's really been bugging me. All that and more coming up next. Hi, my name is Frank. Welcome back to Sundays on channel 33 RPM, your channel for vinyl gear and more. If this is your first time here, please do subscribe so you never miss another episode again. As I told you at the top, I got a handful of records I picked up this summer. I want to show you, plus a few cassettes.
Channel 33 RPM.
The first album I want to show you, I can't actually show you. That's because it was released as a digital album only. And by that I mean it's not available on CD and it's not available on vinyl. I am talking about the latest release from Phil X and the Drills. It's a 6-song EP called Stupid Good Lookings Volume 1. Now stick around with me because I want to tell you about this album, but before I do, I want to address this whole issue of no physical formats because I see this happening more and more, and I think it will continue to happen more and more, particularly with indie releases and releases on small labels, because you and I, we are buying physical products, but I'm convinced that the average consumer is not. Most people are consuming their music, for example, on streaming services. So does it really make sense to always release a physical format? Obviously not, because as I said, this is happening more and more often. I wish I could buy the CD, Phil. I wish I could, but I can't. However, I will talk about this album because it is well worth checking out. For those of you not familiar with Phil X, he's a Canadian guitarist. He's been around like for 2 decades, but nowadays he's perhaps best known as being the replacement for Richie Sambora in Bon Jovi. Now I know what you're thinking, you're not all Bon Jovi fans, but bear with me because this EP and his solo stuff sounds absolutely nothing like Bon Jovi. Rather, he weighs heavily on his influences. You can hear a lot of Van Halen, you can hear some Led Zeppelin, and you can hear some AC/DC. But he takes those influences and it's got really, for lack of a better word, a modern production and a modern twist on that. Plus his, I don't think Phil thinks like a regular person, which I absolutely love. I mean, his lyrics are often kind of stray off the beaten path, and his music, the music kind of takes these odd twists and turns. Like you're listening to one of the songs and you're thinking, you know, this is just a generic rock song. So he takes it like in a 180. And as I said, these twists and turns, which I absolutely love. Like catchy songs, great production, and fantastic musicianship. This is a band that could fit on a bill with a band, say like the Winery Dogs or the Dead Daisies, that kind of stuff. Great tunes, catchy stuff, great musicianship, and well worth checking out. This next one is a reissue of one of my favorite albums from one of my favorite artists. This is the 1971 release from the Alice Cooper band Killer, and this one here is the recent reissue on Friday Music. It's got the gatefold. The original had a calendar in it. This one does as well. Very nice packaging, very nice pressing. But this brings up the whole issue that I raised at the very beginning of this video. And this album has a major issue, which I'm having with a lot, not a lot, but a number of recent reissues. And that is when you compare it to the original pressing, it just falls flat. I'll quickly show you a couple other versions of this album. Here we go. This is a 1970s pressing, Canadian pressing on the old Warner label there. And this is a 1980s pressing. This one is not a gatefold on the different version of the Warner label. So you're probably thinking, Frank, if you already have 2 copies of that record, why did you buy the reissue? Well, for a couple of reasons. A few reasons. It was affordable. I wanted to do a comparison, and those other ones I have, they are, you know, very good to very good plus condition, and I really, really wanted a near mint copy, which this one is, but in terms of the sound quality, as I said, it just falls flat in comparison. The older records, when you pop them on your turntable, the sound is like, it engulfs you. It just sounds huge. The soundstage is huge, and this one, I mean, it sounds okay. It's not horrible. I haven't heard many complaints about this reissue, but again, just in comparison to those originals, it pales in comparison. It doesn't come anywhere close. And this is not a new problem. Longtime viewers of this channel will remember that I was searching for an upgrade copy to my David Bowie Let's Dance. I have an early Canadian pressing, which sounds phenomenal. Like with the Alice Cooper, just a huge soundstage, just an amazing sounding record. I bought the reissue of David Bowie Let's Dance. And again, like this one, it's just flat, it's dull, it's uninspiring. And I don't want to paint every reissue with that same brush, because that is just that's not fair. There's a lot of reissues that sound fantastic, but you know, 2 for 2, a couple I've bought this year just do not sound as good. Sounds okay, but again, it does not sound as good as the original. So I'm going to kind of change my buying philosophy here. I'm not writing off reissues at all. Sometimes the originals are just, the cost of them is sky high. It's crazy. So sometimes you have no choice but to buy a reissue. But my first priority going forward is going to be to find original albums in near mint condition as possible. When all else fails, I will buy the reissue, but I've kind of really learned that lesson from a couple of the reissues I have bought this year, unfortunately. Here's another one I picked up this summer. This is the 50th anniversary single box set for David Bowie's Space Oddity. Again, this came out just this summer. It's got 2 7-inch singles plus a bunch of extras. There's the records have picture sleeves, there's a couple of posters in there, and all sorts of other goodies. The packaging is great. On the first record, it has the original mono single mix of Space Oddity, and the second disc is a 2019 remix of that. And yes, there is a difference. It's kind of cool hearing that. I mean, sort of, you're hearing things you don't hear in the original. Some may think that's sort of sacrilegious to mess with a classic tune like Space Oddity, and I suppose in a sense it is. Actually, on social media this summer, I asked the question to Bowie fans. I said, is this an essential part of the Bowie collection, or is it a cash grab? And you guys are really kind of split on that. But this is what's happening with Bowie. And a lot of artists, it happens when they pass away, like Chris Cornell and Prince and Petty, where the estates are all of a sudden pushing a lot of releases from these albums. So I would humbly suggest that no, this is not an essential part of any Bowie collection. And I am leaning towards calling it a cash grab. As I said, the packaging is cool. You do have to give them kudos for putting it together and charging a decent price for it. I think I picked up for $20 Canadian on Amazon. I do have more records coming up, but first, this. It's time for a Channel 33 RPM Cassette Break. Cassette Break. Cassette Break. I love that little segment. I could sit in my basement if I had time and make cheesy segues all night long. Unfortunately, I don't have all the time in the world, but this is a new segment I'm trying where I'm going to show you some recent cassettes I've picked up. I know not all of you are fans of the cassette formats. I will keep it brief, and I often get asked, Frank, why are you even buying cassettes? They're horrible. And definitely pre-recorded cassettes I am not buying for their fidelity. They tend not to sound great. Sometimes when you record your own cassettes, they can sound all right. For me, cassettes, a lot of it has to do with nostalgia. I listen to them in the garage in the summertime. A lot of these albums I grew up hearing on cassette. That's how my ears got used to listening to them. So that's why. Anyway, I got a handful here, a small handful, including Motley Crue, Shout Out the Devil, 1983. This is probably my favorite Motley Crue album. They really got it right on this release. I mean, like any Motley Crue album, there's a couple fillers on here. I can't think of a Motley Crue album that doesn't have filler on it. Like, no one can tell me they love the tune Children of the Beast. And even Helter Skelter, the cover of the Beatles song, I could take it or leave it. Nonetheless, love this Crue album. What else did I grab? I grabbed the 1987 live release from Priest, simply called Priest Live. This is recorded on their Turbo Tour, which was called Fuel for Life. Funny story about this. In 87, I was like 13 or 14 years old. The day this came out, I went down to the record store and I bought this cassette. And I took it home and I thought, what am I doing buying the cassette? Because like a lot of you of a certain age, I used to back in the day buy the record and then I'd tape it on cassette so I could listen to the cassette on my Walkman and I would still have the record. So I returned the cassette, I exchanged it for the record, and that record I still have. But when I saw it, I thought, hey, I bought it so many years ago, I would pick it up again. It's not the best Priest live album by any stretch of the imagination. Unleashed in the East, of course, is a classic. However, I'm happy to have this one in the collection. Here's another one. I'm a big fan of 90s tapes. And by then, the record companies in my opinion, they seem to have sort of improved the technology further to the point where cassettes were not sounding half bad. So I grabbed this one, the 1995 release from Ozzy Osbourne, Ozzmosis. Again, not the best Ozzy album, but happy to grab it. And finally, some more Judas Priest. This is Metalworks, Judas Priest 73 to 93. And what's cool about this one, which you don't see too often, it was a 2 cassette set. I have the 2 CD set as well. I saw this one on tape and I had to grab it. Personally, I think this is the best Judas Priest compilation. It's extensive and covers so many aspects of their career that you gotta love it.
Channel 33, RPM.
This is a band I don't talk about often enough, but they are one of my favorite bands. I'm talking about The Police. And this is their live album from their reunion tour in the early 2000s, simply called The Police Certifiable. Now, like many of you, I had the Blu-ray CD set. I absolutely loved it and watched it and listened to it all the time. However, I had been eyeing this on vinyl for a while. It's kind of hard to come by, at least here in Canada anyway. So when they reissued it on vinyl this summer, I jumped on it. It wasn't overly expensive. I think I paid like $30 for it. And it is a great live set. And what I like about this particular live set is that the Police sort of reinterpreted their classic songs. They did not try to reproduce those songs identical to the album. The instrumentation is different. The emphasis is different. I mean, what stays the same is melody, and the lyrics are essentially the same, but they really take a lot of liberties with the music. And some of you may not like that. I know I've talked to friends and they prefer to stick to the originals, but if you're going to do a live album, I don't want to hear someone trying to create the studio tracks, because that's never going to happen. So I really dig the way the Police interpret their classics on this album. Wow. And finally, I know I spoke negatively earlier in this video about reissues, and I go and show you a bunch of other reissues, but I want to emphasize not all reissues are bad reissues. There are a lot of good ones. This is another one I had to grab when I saw it came out just this August. This is Streetheart Live After Dark. Now, don't stop. Hear me out, because I know a lot of you have not heard of Streetheart. They are a pop rock band in the vein of Loverboy, early Bon Jovi. They are formed in a Canadian city. They're Canadian. They're formed in a city called Regina, and they're relocated to my hometown in the 80s of Winnipeg. And the original incarnation included Loverboy guitarist Paul Dean and Loverboy drummer Matt Fronette. They left and they went to out west, and they formed Loverboy. But these guys kind of continued on in the same vein. Live After Dark, this is a 2 LP set. It was recorded live here in Winnipeg, in Regina, and in Edmonton. Put out in 1983, the last official release from these guys, and it's a great live representation of what these guys were all about. And what I like about Streetheart, particularly their singer Kenny Shields, who passed away a couple years ago, is that particularly back in the 80s, I thought too many Canadian bands played it safe. It's like the stereotype of the polite, humble Canadian, which I don't think is necessarily true either, but a lot of the bands in the 80s kind of fell into that. They played it really safe. There wasn't a lot of swagger and attitude in the music, unfortunately, but Kenny Shield and Streetheart, I think, really had that. Kenny had that swagger and that attitude, and he was larger than life, and that's what I absolutely love about these guys. So this is a great slice of Canadiana, at least in terms of 1980s rock, and is well worth checking out. All right, 33ers, that is my long overdue vinyl update. Let me know what you thought of these releases in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed yet, again, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode again. Other than that, I hope each and every one of you has a fantastic week. Until next time, keep on spinning.